Jessica Ramirez scored 0 points on the first question of Family Feud Fast Money, and the entire audience laughed. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely press the buzzer. Her answer to "Name something people do with their hands" was "Try to keep them still," and the board showed 0. And laughter rippled through the studio because it seemed like she'd panicked and given a nonsense answer. Steve Harvey shook his head with that trademark look of amused disbelief and said, "Jessica, what are you talking about?" She looked at him with tears already forming and said 6 words that made the laughter die instantly. "I have Parkinson's disease, Steve." The studio went dead silent. Steve froze. His smile vanished. He looked at her hands, really looked, and saw the tremor she'd been trying to hide since she walked on stage 15 minutes earlier. He placed his cards down and said, "How long?" She said, "They diagnosed me 4 months ago. I'm 38 years old, and I have 3 years before I can't pick up my daughter anymore." Steve Harvey had hosted 4,000 episodes of Family Feud. He'd seen crying, he'd seen joy, he'd seen shock, but he'd never stopped a game mid-taping and said to his producers, "Get me Dr. Patterson at Mayo Clinic on the phone right now." What happened in the next 22 minutes changed everything. It was February 28, 2024, at the Family Feud studio in Atlanta. The Ramirez family from San Antonio was playing against the Cooper family from Nashville. Jessica Ramirez stood at the front, 38 years old, wearing a burgundy blouse she'd ironed 3 times that morning because her hands kept shaking and she couldn't get the collar straight. Her husband, Carlos, stood behind her with their 8-year-old daughter, Maya. Her mother, Elena, her sister, Sophia, and her brother, Miguel, completed the team. Everyone was nervous, excited. Standard game show jitters. The first round had gone fine. They'd won. Steve was doing his usual banter. Maya was giggling every time Steve made a face. It looked like any other episode. But what she said next would change everything. But not how anyone expected. Jessica had started noticing the tremor 18 months earlier. It began in her right hand, just a slight shake when she was tired or stressed. She was a dental hygienist at a clinic in San Antonio. She worked with her hands all day. Precise, delicate work cleaning teeth, taking x-rays, handling small instruments. The tremor made it harder. She started dropping tools. She'd reach for a scaler, and her hand would shake, and the instrument would clatter to the floor. Patients would look at her with concern. Her boss, Dr. Chen, pulled her aside in October 2022 and said gently, "Jessica, maybe you should see a doctor. That tremor is getting worse." Jessica said, "It's just stress. I'm fine." She wasn't fine. She was terrified. By January 2023, the tremor had spread to her left hand. Both hands shook constantly now, especially when she was doing fine motor tasks. She couldn't button her daughter's coat anymore. She couldn't sign her name without the pen zigzagging across the paper. She couldn't hold a coffee cup without spilling. Carlos noticed. He said, "Jess, please see a doctor." She said, "I will." But she didn't. Because seeing a doctor would make it real. And if it was real, then she'd have to face what her body was telling her. Something was very wrong. And that wasn't even the part that made Steve cry. In March 2023, Jessica was at work cleaning a patient's teeth when her right hand seized. Not a tremor, a full spasm. The scaler slipped and cut the patient's gum. The patient yelped. Blood welled up. Jessica dropped the instrument, and her hand was shaking violently now, uncontrollably. Dr. Chen rushed in. He took over. After the patient left, he sat Jessica down in his office and said, "You can't work like this. You're going to hurt someone. You need to go to a neurologist today. Not next week. Today." Jessica started crying. She said, "I know what it is. I looked it up. It's Parkinson's." Dr. Chen said quietly, "Then you need to get diagnosed and get treatment. I'm sorry, Jessica, but you can't come back to work until you have medical clearance." Jessica made the appointment. She saw Dr. Linda Vasquez, a neurologist at University Hospital in San Antonio. Dr. Vasquez ran tests for 3 weeks. MRI, blood work, physical exams. On October 12, 2023, Jessica sat in Dr. Vasquez's office with Carlos beside her, holding her shaking hand. Dr. Vasquez said, "Jessica, you have young-onset Parkinson's disease. It's a progressive neurological disorder. Your brain is not producing enough dopamine. That's why you have the tremor, the rigidity, the bradykinesia." Jessica said, "Can you fix it?" Dr. Vasquez said, "We can slow it. We can manage symptoms, but we can't stop it. And in your case, the progression is faster than typical. You're 38. Most people with Parkinson's are diagnosed in their 60s. Younger onset tends to progress more aggressively." Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. "How long before I can't work?" Dr. Vasquez said, "You probably can't continue as a dental hygienist. The fine motor control required, you'll lose that capability within a year." Jessica said, "How long before I can't take care of my daughter?" Dr. Vasquez looked at her chart. She looked back at Jessica. She said, "Conservatively, 3 years before activities of daily living become significantly impaired. 5 years before you'll need substantial assistance. These are estimates. Everyone's different." Jessica said, 3 years. Maya is 8. In 3 years, she'll be 11. I won't be able to brush her hair. I won't be able to help her with homework. I won't be able to hold her." Dr. Vasquez said, "We'll start you on carbidopa-levodopa immediately. It'll help with the tremor. And we'll refer you to physical therapy, occupational therapy. We'll do everything we can." Jessica walked out of that appointment and sat in her car in the parking lot for 45 minutes. Carlos sat beside her, not speaking, just being there. Finally, Jessica said, "I need to tell Maya." Carlos said, "Are you sure? She's 8. Jessica said, "She's going to notice. She already notices." That night, after dinner, Jessica sat Maya down on the couch. She said, "Baby, Mama needs to tell you something. I'm sick. My brain isn't making a chemical it needs, so my hands shake and my body moves slower. It's called Parkinson's disease." Maya looked at her mother's hands. She'd noticed the shaking for months, but hadn't wanted to ask. She said, "Mama, are your hands shaking because I made you sad?" Jessica's heart broke. She pulled Maya close. "No, baby, no. This is not your fault. This is just something that happens sometimes. My body isn't working right." Maya said, "Are you going to die?" Jessica said, "Not for a very long time, but things are going to get harder for me. I'm going to need your help sometimes." Maya nodded seriously. She said the thing that would haunt Jessica for months. "Mama, are your hands shaking right now?" Jessica looked down. They were. They always were. She said, "Yes, baby, but it's okay." But the real story hadn't even started yet. Jessica lost her job in November 2023. Dr. Chen had no choice. The liability was too high. Jessica couldn't work with patients when her hands were unreliable. He offered her a receptionist position at half the pay. Jessica took it because she needed the health insurance. The carbidopa-levodopa helped a little. The tremor was slightly less severe. But she was exhausted all the time. The medication made her nauseous. She lost 15 pounds in 2 months. Carlos worked construction. But his income alone wasn't enough. They were drowning. The mortgage, the car payment, Maya's school expenses, Jessica's medications that cost $480 a month, even with insurance. They were burning through their savings. By January 2024, they had $1,200 left in their account. Jessica's sister Sophia suggested they apply to be on Family Feud. "You guys watch it every night. Maya loves Steve Harvey. Maybe you'll win the $20,000. That would buy you some time." Jessica said, "I can't go on television. Look at me. I can barely hold a pen." Sophia said, "So what? You think Steve Harvey's going to judge you? He's seen everything. Just go. Have fun with your family. Forget about Parkinson's for one day." Jessica agreed. They applied in January. They got selected in February. The taping was scheduled for February 28th. Jessica didn't tell the producers about her Parkinson's. She was afraid they'd disqualify her family. She just showed up, hands shaking, hoping she could get through one episode without anyone noticing. The game started normally. The first round was, name something you'd find in a bathroom. Jessica's team won that round. Steve was funny and kind. He made jokes about Miguel's mustache. He asked Maya about school. Maya was glowing, getting to talk to Steve Harvey. The second round was harder. Jessica's tremor was getting worse under the stage lights and the stress. Her hands shook as she gripped the buzzer. The question was, name something people do with their hands. Jessica hit the buzzer first. Steve said, "Jessica, what you got?" And she said it without thinking, because that's what she did with her hands every single day now. She tried to keep them still. She said, "Try to keep them still." The audience laughed. It sounded like a joke answer, like she'd panicked and said something random. Steve did his trademark shocked face and said, "Try to keep them still? What?" The board showed 0. X sound. The audience laughed harder. Jessica's face burned with humiliation. Steve was grinning, about to make a joke, when he looked at her hands on the buzzer. Really looked. They were shaking visibly. His grin faded. He said, "Jessica, are you okay?" And that's when she said it. Her voice cracked. "I have Parkinson's disease, Steve. That's what I do with my hands. I try to keep them still." The studio fell completely silent. Steve's jaw dropped. The laughter stopped like someone had cut the sound. Carlos stepped forward and put his arm around Jessica. Maya was staring at her mother, tears already forming because Mama was crying on television and everyone had been laughing. Steve walked slowly toward Jessica. He said, "Say that again?" Jessica wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "I was diagnosed 4 months ago. I'm 38. I have young onset Parkinson's. My hands shake. All the time. So when you asked what people do with their hands, that's all I could think of. What I do every day. Try to keep them still so Maya doesn't get scared. Try to keep them still so I can button her coat. Try to keep them still so people don't stare." Her voice broke completely. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to ruin the game." Steve Harvey placed his cards on the podium slowly. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. When he looked back at Jessica, his face had changed completely. He said, "You didn't ruin anything. We're the ones who should apologize. We laughed at you." Jessica shook her head. "You didn't know." Steve said, "That doesn't matter. You're standing here with Parkinson's disease at 38 years old, and we laughed at your pain. That's not funny anymore." He turned to the audience. "That's not funny at all." The room held its breath. Not the usual game show pause, a different kind of silence entirely. Steve walked closer to Jessica. "How bad is it?" Jessica held up her hands. They were trembling constantly. "It's getting worse. I lost my job as a dental hygienist. I can't do fine motor work anymore. The medication helps a little, but not enough. The doctors say I have about 3 years before I can't do basic things anymore. Pick up my daughter, brush her hair, write her birthday cards. 3 years." Steve closed his eyes. "How old is your daughter?" Maya stepped forward. "I'm 8, Mr. Harvey." Steve knelt down to her level. "And your mama's sick?" Maya nodded. "Her hands shake. She tries to hide it, but I see." Steve's voice cracked. "And you're scared?" Maya said, "I don't want her hands to shake. I want her to be okay." Steve stood up and walked a few paces away from them. He stood with his back to the audience. His shoulders moved. He was crying. Hardened television professionals were looking at the floor. Even the crew members had stopped what they were doing. But Steve wasn't done. He turned back around, wiping his face with his handkerchief. He said, "Jessica, let me tell you something. 30 years ago, I was homeless. I was living in my 1976 Ford Tempo. I was showering in gas station bathrooms. I was eating out of trash cans behind restaurants because I didn't have money for food. I slept in that car for 3 years, and every single day, people would look at me like I was garbage, like I was less than human, like my pain was funny or pathetic or something to ignore. Nobody helped me. And I promised God that if I ever got out of that car, if I ever had a platform, I would use it to help people who are suffering and invisible. That's you right now, Jessica. You're suffering, and people are laughing because they don't understand." Steve's voice got stronger. "But I understand. Because 30 years ago, I was you. I was the person everyone overlooked. And you know what saved me? One stranger who saw me. One person who said, 'I see your pain, and it matters.' That's what I'm doing right now." He looked at his producers in the booth. "Stop the game, I mean it. We're not playing anymore. Jessica didn't come here to win a game show. She came here because she's drowning, and she needs help. And maybe, just maybe, someone would see her. Well, I see you. And we're going to do something about it." Steve pulled out his phone. Right there on stage. He dialed a number. The audience was dead silent. A man's voice answered on speaker. "Hello?" Steve said. "This is Steve Harvey. Am I speaking to Dr. James Patterson at Mayo Clinic?" The voice said, "Yes, Mr. Harvey. This is Dr. Patterson." Steve said, "Doctor, I'm on stage right now with a woman named Jessica Ramirez. She's 38 years old. She was diagnosed with young-onset Parkinson's 4 months ago. She's been told she has 3 years before significant motor impairment. I need you to tell me if that timeline is accurate or if there are treatments she doesn't know about." There was a pause. Dr. Patterson said, "Mr. Harvey, young-onset Parkinson's can be aggressive. But there are clinical trials, experimental treatments that might help. Is she on carbidopa-levodopa?" Jessica nodded, then realized he couldn't see her. She said, "Yes." Dr. Patterson said, "That's standard, but there are deep brain stimulation options, gene therapy trials, new drug protocols. She needs to be evaluated by a specialist team. The problem is, most of those treatments are expensive and not covered by insurance." Steve said, "What's expensive?" Dr. Patterson said, "A comprehensive treatment plan at Mayo could cost between $200,000 to $300,000 over 2 years. And that doesn't guarantee reversal, but it could slow progression significantly." Steve didn't hesitate. "Set it up. I'm covering it. All of it. I want Jessica evaluated next week. I want the best team you have. I want every treatment option on the table. And if it costs $500,000, I don't care. We're giving her a fighting chance." The audience erupted. Jessica's legs buckled. Carlos caught her. Maya was crying. Dr. Patterson said, "Mr. Harvey, are you serious?" Steve said, "Dead serious. And there's more. I want you to work with us on something bigger. We're starting a foundation today. It's called the Steady Hands Foundation, for people with young onset Parkinson's who can't afford treatment. Jessica's not the only 38-year-old out there losing her ability to hold her daughter. We're going to help all of them." Steve hung up and turned to Jessica. "You're going to Mayo Clinic next week. All expenses paid. Travel, hotel, treatment, everything. You're going to get evaluated by the best Parkinson's team in the country. And they're going to do everything medically possible to slow this down. I can't promise they'll cure you, but I can promise you're not fighting this alone anymore." Jessica couldn't speak. She just sobbed. Carlos was crying. Maya ran to Steve and hugged his legs. Steve picked her up. He said, "Your mama's going to be okay, baby. We're going to help her." Maya said through tears, "Thank you, Mr. Steve. Thank you for seeing her." Steve wasn't finished. He looked at the Cooper family on the other side of the stage. They'd been standing quietly, crying, watching everything. Steve said, "Cooper family, you came here to compete. This isn't what you signed up for. But I need to tell you something. Today isn't about winning. Today is about witness. You just witnessed something real, something raw. And now you get to decide what you do with that." The Cooper family father, James, stepped forward. His voice was thick. "Steve, give our winnings to Jessica's family. We don't need it, they do." His wife, Rachel, nodded. "We have good insurance. We have stable jobs. They're fighting for their lives. Give them everything." Steve's voice cracked again. "You sure about that?" James said, "We're sure. This is bigger than a game show." Steve turned to the scoreboard operator. "Both families win the $20,000. Cooper family gets their money. Ramirez family gets their money. And I'm adding another $30,000 from me personally. That's $70,000 to help Jessica and her family survive while we fight this thing." The studio exploded. People were standing, sobbing, applauding. Even the producers in the booth were crying. Steve said, "This is what humanity looks like. This is what happens when we stop laughing at pain and start seeing it." The episode aired 3 weeks later and broke the internet in 24 hours. The clip reached 389 million views in 4 days. #SteadyHands trended globally for 5 days. Celebrities shared it. News outlets covered it. Ellen called it the most powerful moment in television history. But the real story is what happened after. Jessica went to Mayo Clinic on March 15, 2024. She spent 2 weeks there. Dr. Patterson's team evaluated her extensively. They started her on a new medication protocol. They enrolled her in a gene therapy trial. They fitted her for a deep brain stimulation device that could reduce her tremor by up to 70%. The treatment was aggressive and exhausting, but it was hope. Real, tangible hope. By May 2024, Jessica's tremor had decreased by 40%. She still shook, but less. She could hold a coffee cup. She could button Maya's coat. She could sign her name without the pen zigzagging. The Steady Hands Foundation raised $6.7 million in its first 6 months. The foundation has funded treatment for 94 people with young-onset Parkinson's. One of them was a 32-year-old firefighter from Oregon who'd been forced into medical retirement. The foundation paid for his DBS surgery. 6 months later, he was back on modified duty. Another was a 41-year-old teacher from Florida with 3 kids. The foundation covered her Mayo Clinic evaluation and experimental drug trial. Her tremor stabilized. She's still teaching. Every person helped by the foundation receives a handwritten note from Jessica that says, "You are seen. You are not alone. Keep your hands as steady as you can, and we'll fight the rest together." Steve Harvey still calls Jessica every Sunday. He FaceTimes with her and Maya. He asks how the treatments are going. He celebrates small victories. Jessica picking up a full glass of water without spilling. Jessica writing her name clearly. Jessica braiding Maya's hair again. In an interview 8 months after the episode aired, Robin Roberts asked Steve why Jessica's story affected him so deeply. Steve said, "Because everyone laughed, including me for a second. We laughed at her pain because we didn't understand it. And that's what happened to me when I was homeless. People laughed. People looked away. People treated my suffering like it was entertainment or background noise. I swore I'd never do that to someone else. And when I realized we'd laughed at Jessica, I knew I had to make it right. Not just for her. For every person suffering invisibly while the world treats their pain like a punchline." 1 year after the taping, Jessica's tremor is 60% improved. She's not cured, there is no cure. But she's stable, she's functional. She can do most things she couldn't do a year ago. She returned to work part-time at Dr. Chen's office, not as a hygienist, but training new employees. She uses her experience to teach them about compassion, about seeing patients as whole people, about asking questions instead of making assumptions. Maya is 9 now. She tells people her mama is the bravest person she knows. Last month, Maya's class did a project on heroes. Maya wrote about Jessica. She wrote, "My mama's hands shake, but her heart doesn't. She's strong even when her body isn't. She's teaching me that broken things can still be beautiful." Jessica and Carlos still watch Family Feud every night with Maya. Every time Steve appears on screen, Maya says, "That's the man who saved Mama." And Jessica corrects her gently. "He didn't save me, baby. He saw me. That's what saved me." There's a plaque in the waiting room at Mayo Clinic's Parkinson's Treatment Center now. It says, "The Steady Hands Foundation, because everyone deserves to hold the people they love." Jessica and Maya drove to Rochester to see it installed. Jessica stood in front of it with Maya beside her, holding her shaking hand steady. She said, "This is for everyone who got laughed at when they needed help. Everyone who tried to hide their pain because they were ashamed. Everyone fighting battles no one can see. You're not invisible anymore." 2 years after the episode, researchers at Mayo Clinic using data from the Steady Hands Foundation identified a new biomarker for young-onset Parkinson's that could lead to earlier diagnosis and intervention. They named it the Ramirez marker, after Jessica. Early diagnosis could mean treatment starts before significant motor impairment. It could mean people like Jessica have 10 years instead of 3. It could mean children grow up with parents who can still hold them. Jessica cried when Dr. Patterson called to tell her. She said, "I just wanted to hold my daughter. I didn't know it would lead to this." Dr. Patterson said, "That's how breakthroughs happen. One person fights hard enough that everyone else starts fighting too." Sometimes you walk onto a stage thinking you're playing a game, and you realize you're actually asking for help in the only way you know how. Sometimes the thing that humiliates you becomes the thing that saves you. Sometimes the audience laughs because they don't understand, and then someone stops everything and says, "Look closer, see the pain, witness the suffering, do something about it." That's what happened on February 28, 2024, when Jessica Ramirez said 5 words that sounded like a joke, but were actually a cry for help. "Try to keep them still." And Steve Harvey heard her. Not the words, the meaning underneath, the desperation, the fear, the invisible suffering that everyone overlooks because it's easier to laugh than to see. If this story reminds you to look closer at the people around you, to see pain even when it's hiding, to offer help instead of judgment, share it. Someone in your life is trying to keep something still. Their hands, their tears, their fear, their collapse. They're suffering invisibly while everyone around them laughs or looks away or doesn't notice. Be the person who sees them. Be the person who says, "That's not funny anymore." Be the person who stops the game and makes the call and says, "You're not fighting this alone." That's what love looks like. That's what witnessing means. That's the difference between laughing at pain and lifting it. Choose to see. Choose to help. Choose to be the reason someone's hands steady, even just a little bit, even just for today.